handed these out on Thursday. For those of you who like, we have Dale made for us a counting of the Omer sheet, so that each day you have the blessing there that goes with it in Hebrew and in English, and it goes all the way through. So if you'd like to have one of those, so for instance, it has a blessing that goes for the beginning of each day, and then also in Hebrew English. So see me if you'd like one of those. We have copies of that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Technically, what time of day are we supposed to say the blessing for the Omer? The evening before and the day start?
Yeah, anytime.
Do it.
Well, I can tell what the rabbi said.
What?
I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying that this is their. I think they basically said anytime after the evening starts from 6 o'clock to midnight.
Oh.
Somewhere between 6 and midnight, you should say the blessing for that day, since you've already entered the day.
Yeah, I know.
So that's how they're thinking.
Thank you.
They did that 6 to midnight thing on a lot of things, saying if you're doing the blessings, somewhere between 6 and midnight, and then before you go to bed would be the.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of the way they're thinking on it. All right. Yeah, good question. But yeah, that's good, very good question. So we're looking at today resurrection in the Hebrew Scriptures. The reason I had us read Daniel chapter 12 is because many of the evangelical scholars and many Jewish scholars will tell us, if you read extensively, that the clearest place that we have the idea of resurrection is in Daniel chapter 12. Go there with me again. Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12, verses 1, 2, and 3. Now look what he says there. He says, and many of those who sleep in the dust, so sleep was a metaphor for death. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. So this is the text where most Jewish scholars and most conservative evangelical scholars would say, this is the place where we get the clearest, straightforward idea of resurrection. And Daniel's the one that gives it to us the clearest here. Okay? What I want to argue is, I'm not denying that Daniel is clear here about resurrection. I think very much so. However, what I want to work with us through today is looking at some text in the Hebrew Scripture that I think also moves us towards this idea of resurrection, and especially as we see confirmation of that in the apostolic text. Some of these we'll see confirmed in the apostolic text, some not, but I want to work through some of these. Now, so let's hope you got your Bibles with you. By the way, since we've been going through the book of Leviticus, what's the number one form of impurity? Death. Corpse defilement, right? Corpse defilement. So if corpse defilement makes you the most unclean, and you can be remedied of corpse defilement, that's an indication that resurrection can happen. Because if you have contracted death, but through the ashes of the red heifer and through an immersion, you can then be cleansed and go back in the presence of God, even though you've been corpse defiled. It's an indication that resurrection is on its way. Because now, a person who was dead from entering into the tabernacle can become alive again and now enter in. So there were little hints like this all along that resurrection was coming. Even if it wasn't explicit, even if it wasn't clear in ways that we would like for it to be clear. Okay? But I want to go through some text here with you. Go with me to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. This is the story of Joseph. We'll start in chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. This begins, actually, the Toledot, the generations of Jacob. But the narrative begins by describing what's going on primarily with Joseph. Genesis chapter 37, when we get there. Notice what happens. We're going to pick it up in verse 9. Verse 9. Genesis 37, verse 9. Look what he says. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the stars, the 11 stars, bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now here's the point. In the narrative, as we continue reading, and we will read all the way to the end, chapter 50, there's never a place where his mother bows to him in the narrative, ever. Never happens. His father comes and bows down, Jacob. His 11 brothers come and bow down, but his mother does not bow down to him. Never happens. So in order for this to be fulfilled, there comes a day when Rachel will have to bow to Joseph, or the son of Joseph. One of the two. Doesn't matter to me. Point is, in order for this to be fulfilled, and it will be fulfilled, there has to be resurrection. That's the only way it can happen. In order for Rachel to bow. So here's the text kind of indicating to us that resurrection was going to occur. Kind of hinting at that. Do you see what I'm saying there? Everybody tracking with me on that one? Okay. If you have any questions, raise your hands. This is your time, so I'm just trying to. Yes, go ahead.
So for those who don't understand, we always think of resurrection with Christ, or Yeshua.
Right.
And so what's being clarified now is that, yes, that was significant, but that people who die, according to what the book of Daniel says, they will be resurrected too.
Yes.
Of course, it's not the same. Is there a difference between the Hebrew word speaking of resurrection for people and then for Christ?
Same word being used, so the fundamental difference. But good question, great, good comment, yes.
You said that the mother didn't bow, so she's going to resurrect and bow. The purpose of that, by the man, the husband bowing, wouldn't that, because the man and woman are one, wouldn't that fall under the his covering or not?
I don't think so. I don't go that route because Jacob makes the delineation, the sun and the moon. And even though
she represents the moon because, okay.
Yeah, she's the lesser light, so to speak. But the sun, he says in the dream, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars, I see. And Jacob says, shall I and your mother and your 11 brothers bow down to you? The 11 brothers do, the father does, but the moon, representing the mother, never does. So, yes, they're one, but in the dream they're delineated.
Now, is there like a constellation when it talks about the 11 stars? Is there a specific set of stars that he was talking about?
No, he's just referring to them as, he's using the dream said, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars will bow down to me.
Okay.
So he's just using these astral terms.
There's not a deeper meaning.
No, I wouldn't go to a deeper meaning on these other than that's just the language that's being used. Sun, moon, and 11 stars.
Okay.
So, and you're correct that they're one flesh, but I think in the dream itself, as Jacob delineates it, he says sun, moon, stars. So he is putting, and that seems to be the indication of the dream.
Well, he's also a type of Messiah as well. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah.
I think too that I don't know the whole explanation, but it's also to be a metaphor. I know the cows, the other cows have a metaphor.
Right.
So I'm wondering if the stars are basically just describing the placement of.
No doubt, absolutely. However, what's interesting is in the fulfillment of the dream, Jacob does literally, physically come and bow down to Joseph.
Right, but I'm just talking about using stars
Right.
and moon and all that kind
Oh,
of
sure. These are metaphors. These are figures.
Yeah.
And the 11 stars representing the 11 brothers do come and bow down. So, yeah, they're pictures. The dream is a picture. So, just using these using the sun, the moon, and the stars as a picture for the whole process. Yeah. I wouldn't want to, I mean, it was a literal fulfillment. Meant to be literal, and as the narrative tells us, because Jacob does come and bow, so do the 11 brothers, so there's a literal fulfillment in this, even though the metaphor of the dream is what it is. All right, any other questions or comments? That's a tough one, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm wondering why they mentioned Leah. I mean, because she was the mother of the other.
Jacob doesn't like Leah. That's the short answer. Jacob, listen to this. Jacob, we've read this. Jacob, from his perspective, says, I had one wife. In his thinking, he says, I had one wife and I had 2 sons. He looks at the 12. He looks at the 10 other boys and says, I have 2 sons.
But he buries Leah next to his kin.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So,
in fact, Rachel's the only one that's not buried at Hebron in the case of
that's
Machpelah.
significant. I mean, maybe he sort of considers her something.
He does. She's a wife, but when he looks at the 10 boys later on in life, he goes, I have 2 sons. What he meant by that was this. Hey, as far as I'm concerned, the only 2 I ever really cared about, Joseph, Benjamin. So, I mean, from Jacob's perspective, I'm not saying he's right to feel that way. I'm just saying it's not right, but the one he loved was Rachel. The one he wanted to have children with was Rachel. Now, that didn't happen right away. In fact, everybody's having children but her.
Yeah.
So, I mean, his handmaids 2 handmaids are having children, Leah's having children, Rachel's locked up, barren because God locked her up. Okay? So, now she's able to have children, and he says, Joseph, Benjamin. That's my 2 children. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking, you say Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, but Leah was older than Rachel, right?
Yeah, because
Yeah, she's the oldest. Yeah, and Laban says as much because he says, hey, we give the older here first in marriage before we give the younger. Yes.
But we think of them.
We think of them, yeah. So, all right, good comments. Go with me to Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22. This was our Torah reading for today. It's known in Hebrew as the Akedah, the binding, because Isaac is bound. Look at Genesis chapter 22. Here's where resurrection comes in. He says this. This is Abraham speaking. He says, and Abraham said to his young men, verse 5, Genesis 22:5. Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will return to you. He says, we will return. When he intends to go up and offer Yitzhak as a olah, a burnt offering. Now go with me to Hebrews chapter 12, to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And look at verse 17. Verse 17. Hebrews 11:17 says this. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which also he received him in a figurative sense. There's the divine commentary. Abraham was tested. But Abraham concluded that God was able to raise him from the dead. Now the question becomes this. What in the past, prior to chapter 22, made Abraham think that resurrection was possible? Because I just read to you Genesis 37, but that's later. What in the life of Abraham led him to conclude that God could raise, if he slaughtered Isaac, God would raise him from the dead, or could raise him? Yes.
Well, would that be like a spoke? Just like he was told to leave his home I mean, that was a verbal thing. Abraham, get out of here. You don't belong here. Do you think God spoke to him commandments and spoke to him instruction also?
Oh, no doubt that God spoke, but I'm saying what?
Is there?
Yeah, well, I'm asking you this question. What happened in Abraham's life that made him have faith that resurrection was possible? Hold on, yeah.
I think it was that God promised his seed would be, he would have like a lot of,
Descendants?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, millions and millions of the sand of the seashore. So how
Okay.
would he be able to have that if he didn't have Isaac?
Agreed. Absolutely agree with you. But what else told him that that was possible? Yes.
The barrenness of his wife.
There you go. The barrenness of his wife. That's what I was getting at. His wife was barren. She couldn't have children. In fact, her womb, the text tells us, was dead. And out of that womb, God brought life. Out of this dead body, so to speak, this inability, this death, came life. Isaac. Her womb was dead. She couldn't have children unless there was some supernatural intervention. And there was. And out of death, her womb, came life. Isaac. And Abraham went, I got it. I get it.
Oy vey.
Oy vey. God can bring life out of death. So he asked me to kill Isaac. So that's what gave Abraham faith. When he gets to Mount Moriah, he says, we will go up, we will worship, and we will return. And the text in Hebrews 11 says, Abraham believed that even if God took his life, that God would raise him back up. Abraham had resurrection faith. You bet he did. Incredible faith, because he reasons that, you know what? If God can bring life, Isaac, out of death in his birth, then once he's alive, he can bring him back to life as well. Just as easy. So Abraham has resurrection faith. Any comments? Thoughts? Yes.
It really gives a lot of significance to a woman's womb, though, because, I mean, if that's considered creating life from death, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, because her womb was dead. That's why God waited so long. So she just, humanly speaking, could not have children. Then he says, okay, now I'll give you life. And out of that which was dead, naturally, life could not have occurred. Out of that came life. And God says, and Abraham says, well, if God can do that, then if I have to slay Isaac, he's made a, like you said, he's made a promise to me. He's got to bring him back to life. Hebrews 11 confirms that. Go with me to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. Now this one is a little more veiled. Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, very famous text, because you have the angel of the Lord here, you have Elohim here, and you have Yahweh here. All three are in this bush. It's a very crowded bush. The bush is on fire. I suspect that what's happened is the bush is, this is my theory, because there's fire in this bush, that we have the chariot of God in this bush. Because the bush is on fire but not being consumed. So I suspect that the bush is somewhat of a cover for this chariot of fire that we find in other places, yes.
Does it also represent the Ruach HaKodesh, such as in the upper room, tongues of fire?
Well, like we've said, from the time of Genesis 19 and even a little bit before that, after the flood, from the time of the flood forward, the manifestation of God to his people is, or either in blessing or in judgment, is fire. He's going to use fire as a way of manifesting himself. All the way through the text. I mean, if you do a study on fire and God's work with fire, it's all over the place. So he's going to use fire as a means of manifesting himself throughout the Hebrew text. And the Holy Spirit, yes, I would include that in there. Okay, look at this. He says this. This is very veiled, but Yeshua picks up on this, and so it's important. I mean, it's important by itself, but the very fact that Yeshua picks up on it is even more important. He says this. Then he said, do not draw near from this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is Admat Kadosh, holy ground. So, where else is holy ground? Where else is holy ground?
Temple.
Temple.
Yeah.
Temple. So, this angel of the Lord Yahweh says that wherever he is holy ground. He thinks he's temple. That means Yeshua is temple as well. He's temple in motion, wherever he is. That's key. Now look what he says. He says, I am the God of, he says, more, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Okay? Now, we know, if we've just read Genesis, that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov are dead. Okay? But he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, go with me. We can look at a number of verses. Look at with you Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. And we're going to pick up the reading in verse 23. Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. It says, the same day the Zadok, Sadducees, we say Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him, Yeshua, and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses said that if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. It's very true. Now there were with us 7 brothers. The first died, and he had married, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third, even to the 7th. I'm skipping down verse 28. Therefore in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all have her. Yeshua answered and said to them, now look at this. You are mistaken, not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God.
Amen.
I would say that pretty much sums up the majority of Christianity today. But concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitudes heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. He just quoted from Exodus 3:6. He said, didn't you read the text? There is resurrection. Sadducees don't believe in resurrection. He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're going to be resurrected. They are resurrected. It's okay. Okay? So resurrection is there in Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, when he speaks this, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not I was or I will be. I already am. All right. I'm going to skip to one of these other odd ones. Numbers chapter 16 and 17. Go with me to the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 16 and 17. What I'm trying to do with you is to show you that there is a suite of texts in the Hebrew Scriptures that speak to resurrection. If we're willing to see it, if we're willing to understand that this was a concept that was there all along. It wasn't something laid over it. It was something that was intrinsic to it. In chapter 16 of Numbers, you have the rebellion of Korah. The rebellion happens, and in fact, notice verse 35 of chapter 16, and fire came out from the Lord and consumed 250 men who were offering incense. Fire again. Okay? All over the text, fire. God using fire as a means of bringing judgment or manifesting himself. Now, skip over to chapter 16, chapter 17. The rebellion of Korah was about who had the right to be a priest. And these other leaders in Israel said, well, how come Aaron gets to be the priest? And frankly, they had a good point, because Aaron's got some problems, you know? Aaron's a little problematic. But he's the man of God's choosing, from the tribe of God's choosing. And look what happens. And the Lord spoke to Moses, chapter 17, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and get from them a staff, or rod, from each father's house, all their leaders, according to their father's houses, 12 rods, one from each tribe. And by the way, the word for tribe and the word for staff are the same word, because each tribe had a staff that represented that tribe. So I can either speak of the word, I can say the word tribe, and the same word also stood for this staff. Okay? So look at this, verse 4. Then you shall place them in the tabernacle of meeting before the testimony, where I meet with you. And it shall be the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom, that I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel, which they make against you. Verse 6, so Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and each of their leaders gave him a rod apiece, for each leader according to their fathers' houses, 12 rods. And the rod of Aaron was among their rods, and Moses placed the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Now it came to pass on the next day that Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds, had produced blossoms, and yielded ripe almonds. In one day. Okay? So my point is this. These staffs, which are dead, are able to bear life in one day. To the point that they're giving off, this stick is giving off ripe almonds. Nobody else is of the other 12. Just the house of Levi representing Aaron. Life can come out of death. And this staff is an indication that in a day you can have, he does in a day what takes months to happen.
It was important enough to put in the ark.
It's enough to put, yeah, it's put in the ark. This Aaron's rod that buds is placed inside the ark of the covenant. Okay? So, hey, but the point is that in one day, ripe almonds come off of this stick that had not been in the ground. They just put them in the ground, all 12 of them, right there in a row. They come back the next day, and we have ripe almonds off the one that belongs to the house of Levi. Because that's the one who I've chosen. So, now, we'll look at some other texts. Go with me to 1 Kings chapter 17. 1 Kings chapter 17. Now, look at First Kings chapter 17, verse 17. This is Elijah. So remember the order. We have Elijah and then Elisha. Okay, Eliah, Elisha. Okay, so we have, got to keep those two in order. First Elijah. Look at 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 17. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. And his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him. That's how the Hebrew people describe death. Breath going outside of you. Once breath leaves you, you're dead. It wasn't about brain waves. It wasn't about heartbeat. It was about breath. He says this. So she said to Elijah, what have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son? And he said to her, give me your son. So he took him out of her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his own bed.